U.S. Senator Gary Peters, one of our guests today on Spotlight. Very quickly, pipeline safety legislation. You don't want any crude oil coming across these Great Lakes.
Well, with the pipeline, it's about safety. We do, but in the legislation I've introduced to Senator Stabenow, we do ban the transport of crude oil on tankers. Think the Exxon Valdez and the oil disaster there. We don't believe that oil tankers should be traversing the Great Lakes. Currently, we don't do that because it has been considered unacceptable risks. If you have a tanker leak or disaster in the Great Lakes, so it would be catastrophic. But there are folks who are talking about it. In fact, there was a group out of Wisconsin that wanted to build a dock to be able to bring in tankers. It met with a lot of local opposition and stopped, but it's an issue that will keep coming up. So we want to be proactive and stop that. But the major focus of the legislation is to bring greater security and safety to pipelines, particularly in the Great Lakes. And I'm particularly concerned about the Line 5, which is in the Straits of Mackinac, and believe that we have to have greater oversight and have to be prepared to deal with the disaster up there, which it is considered that if there is an oil pipeline break or any kind of oil spill in the Straits of Mackinac, it is the absolute worst place to have an oil spill anywhere in the Great Lakes, according to a recent study from the University of Michigan. So it's something we have to be very vigilant upon. We have a comprehensive bill, and I'm hoping to incorporate a lot of that language when we reauthorize the PHMSA, which is the federal agency responsible for oversight. It's actually in my committee. We're going to be taking it up in the next 2 or 3 weeks, and I'm hoping to put a number of safeguards in place to help protect the Great Lakes.
Flint water crisis. Did the governor drop the ball on this?
It certainly appears as such. It took a long time to have that reaction. Certainly we heard considerably from my constituents in the Flint area. Our office is engaged there. We worked with the EPA, which is the federal response that provided technical assistance, and we're very concerned about what they saw. And you know, it looked as if it's something that the emergency manager thought he was going to be saving some money for Flint, but was not considering what the impact would be on the residents. So hopefully that will get corrected as quick as possible. That we certainly can't tolerate that. But I think I think it's important for your viewers to also look at the Flint incident as saying this is really a broader issue as well with infrastructure, that we've got older infrastructure, particularly in our urban areas. We're having a hard time getting the resources to fix our roads and bridges, but you also have to think underground as well. We've got to make sure we have the water infrastructure that's up to date and does not pose risk.
I didn't realize that we have the 6th greatest number of microbreweries in Michigan.
In the country.
Compared to in the country.
Right.
And you're also trying to make sure that the tax structure is one in which it will help them thrive. So you're trying to cut some of the taxes there.
That's right. For the small...
the breweries as well as for the distilleries.
Distillers, right? And we're actually one of the top in the country as well for micro distillers as well. So it is a business that are sprouting up. They bring jobs to a local community. They tend to be on Main Street. They hire local folks. People enjoy going to them and touring them. It's actually great for tourism, and you see these popping up in areas bringing people in. And there's also an agricultural component. As you're looking at a microbrewery, for example, people like to have local ingredients, and hops is a part of it right now. We don't grow enough hops in Michigan to provide the material necessary for them, and so we can expand that, and it means agricultural jobs as well. So this is a win-win, but it is capital intensive. It's very expensive to start some of these up, and so having a tax break for lower production, then the tax would go back to the regular amount once you get over 100,000 gallons, for example, with a microbrewery. But it helps them get started, create local jobs in our local community, and also help the agricultural sector. It's truly a win-win.
You've been working with Senator Stabenow on legislation, particularly to make sure that we can continue the blight removal that we have going on in the city of Detroit and other urban areas across the state.
We did. Senator Stabenow and I fought to keep hardest hit funds in place so that we could continue to fund the blight removal. The recent studies that have come out show that this blight removal has had a dramatic impact on neighborhoods. You see property values going up immediately as you knock down these buildings, and particularly if you're in neighborhoods that are stable but are starting to weaken, you want to make sure you're knocking down those abandoned buildings. And when you do that, the return is pretty amazing back in terms of rising property values, which is so important for the city of Detroit. So it's a very important program. It's proving to be extremely successful, and that's why we have to fight to make sure the funding continues to be there, because it's certainly a key component of the renaissance of the city of Detroit.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the Middle East. You just recently went to the Middle East. You looked at what's going on with the refugees there, particularly in Syria. Do you agree with the governor that we should be letting them in? And are we doing enough to help those coming here?
I do think we should to increase refugees from Syria, as well as Christian folks from Iraq, some of the Chaldeans, kind of religious minorities as well that are under a very difficult state there. In fact, as you mentioned, I was in the Middle East. I was in Zatari, which is the largest Syrian refugee camp in Jordan. Over 85,000 people were in that camp. And to give you a sense of what they're going through, they get a food allowance each day of about 50 cents. You can't buy a lot of food on 50 cents. So they get one propane bottle a month to cook from. They've got to be very careful on what they use. But more importantly, as I had conversations with the refugees there, they're just losing hope. They don't know what their future holds. But ultimately, I asked them, where do you want to go? They didn't want to go to the United States. They didn't want to go to Europe. They just want to go home. So we have to stabilize that situation, stabilize Syria, get a political solution there to let folks go home. But in the meantime, stepping up to do our part, as the world community has, makes sense to take in refugees. It's about who we are as Americans, and I've written a letter to the President asking him to increase the amount of folks who are religious minorities that are being persecuted in that area, as well as Syrian refugees.
Is the President's foreign policy working in that area, and particularly as it relates to Syria? You've got Russia that is very much helping Syria. You've got the air attacks, possible ground troops going in. Not yet, but a lot of people believe that's what's next, and that the United States could find itself smack dab in the middle of another nasty situation.
Well, it is very concerning. The airstrikes, and I met when I was in the Middle East, met with our military commanders on the ground who believe that the airstrikes are very effective against ISIS in particular, which is a major problem in Syria as well as in Iraq, and we've been focusing our efforts there. Those have been effective. Unfortunately, the plan to train free Syrian fighters has not worked. They have not trained large numbers, and that is not effective. And then you've got the Russians, as you mentioned, now in there. It's only going to make it more complex, complicates it immensely, and it makes the solution that much more difficult.
All right. Senator Gary Peters, thanks for coming in. A lot more questions. We'll have to get you back. You're running. We're running a little bit. But it's always good having you in our
It's always a pleasure to be here.